I know exactly who hurt you. I need you to understand that before we go any further, this is not a general message meant for everyone in the same vague way. I am speaking directly to you right now about the specific people who wounded you, the ones who were supposed to be safe and were not, the ones who had your trust and used it carelessly, the ones who smiled to your face and said things behind your back that would have broken your heart if you had heard them in the moment, the ones who left when staying would have cost them something. I was there for every single moment of it. I saw every betrayal. I heard every word spoken about you in rooms you were not in, and today I am going to speak to what you have been carrying alone because of them. You have tried to be fair about it. You have tried to see things from their perspective. You have tried to be the bigger person and not hold on to bitterness and move on with grace and not let what they did define how you see people. And most days you manage to do that. But there are moments when the full weight of what happened lands on you fresh, and it is not a small weight. The betrayal of someone you loved and trusted is one of the heaviest things a human heart can carry, and I am not going to minimize that today by rushing past it toward easy comfort. I am going to sit with you in it first. I know the specific person you thought about when this message began. I know their name. I know the relationship you had. I know how long you gave to that relationship and how much of yourself you poured into it. I know the day the rupture happened, or the slow way it happened over time, which is sometimes even harder to grieve because there was no single moment to point to. I know the version of events they told other people, and I know the version you have never been able to fully tell, because telling it would require a level of vulnerability that you are not sure is safe yet. I know both versions, and I know which one is true, and I know what you lost when that relationship broke. The thing about betrayal is that it does not just wound the relationship it happened in. It reaches further than that. It changes the way you walk into every room now. It changed the way you make eye contact, and the way you receive kindness, and the way you decide how much of yourself to offer in new relationships. You became more careful after what happened to you, and that carefulness looks like wisdom from the outside, but from the inside, you know it is also a kind of guardedness that is costing you connection. You do not let people fully in anymore the way you used to. And part of you mourns the version of yourself that trusted so openly before the wound changed you. I want to tell you something important about that open, trusting version of yourself. They were not naive. They were not foolish. They were generous with their love and generous with their trust. And that generosity was a beautiful quality that the betrayal did not earn. The fault for what happened does not belong to your openness. It belongs to the person who took advantage of it. Do not punish yourself by closing off completely. Do not let someone else's failure to honor your trust teach you that trust itself was the mistake. Trust is not the mistake. Placing it in that particular person at that particular time was simply a human error that came from not yet knowing what you know now. I know you have replayed the events leading up to the betrayal many times looking for the signs you missed. You have gone back through the timeline of that relationship looking for the moments where you should have known, and you have found them now with hindsight in a way you could not see them in the moment. And the finding of them has produced a particular kind of shame that says you should have known better. I want to address that shame directly. You were not wrong to trust someone who presented themselves as trustworthy. You were not foolish to believe someone who told you they were your friend. The signs that feel obvious now were not obvious then because you were operating in good faith, and good faith does not automatically generate suspicion. The problem was not your perception. The problem was their character. I know the specific loss that came with the end of that relationship beyond just the person themselves. There were other things attached to that relationship, a community perhaps, a sense of belonging, a shared history, mutual friends who felt they had to choose sides, plans that involved them that now have to be rewritten, a future you imagined that no longer exists in the form you pictured it. Betrayal rarely comes as a single loss. It comes as a cascade of losses that you are still discovering months or years later when you encounter a moment that was supposed to include them and now does not. I want to speak to the anger you have not fully allowed yourself to feel. You have felt it in flashes and then quickly worked to process it or suppress it. because anger feels dangerous, or because someone told you that holding onto anger only hurts you and not them. There is truth in that, but it is not the full truth. Anger also needs to be acknowledged before it can be released. Anger that is suppressed without first being honored does not disappear. It goes underground and then expresses itself sideways in moments that seem unrelated to the original wound. Let yourself feel the full anger of what happened to you, not to act on it destructively, not to hold onto it as a permanent resident in your heart, but to acknowledge that what happened to you was genuinely wrong and that your anger about it is a completely appropriate response to injustice. Because it was injustice, I want to name that clearly. What happened to you was not fair. What they did was not okay. What they did was not okay. However, it was framed afterward. However, they explained or justified or minimized it. Whatever the narrative was that made it seem like you were the problem. However, the story was rewritten in the retelling. I know what actually happened, and what actually happened was not okay. And you deserve to have that acknowledged not just by me, but by yourself. Stop making excuses for what they did because it is easier than facing how deeply wrong it was. I know some of you are carrying wounds from people who claim to love you the most. A parent who said love while consistently communicating the opposite. A spouse who promised forever and demonstrated something entirely different. A friend who said they had your back and turned away at the exact moment that having your back would have cost them something. These are not minor wounds. These are the wounds that go to the core of how you understand your own worth, because the people who hurt you were also the people whose opinion of you carried the most weight. When the people who are supposed to think most highly of you treat you as if you are expendable, it creates a question inside you that does not have an easy answer. Am I actually worth loving well? Am I actually worth staying for? Am I actually worth the cost of real commitment? I want to answer that question right now with everything I have. Yes, you are worth loving well. Yes, you are worth staying for. Yes, you are worth the cost of real and genuine commitment. The fact that specific people failed to demonstrate that is not evidence about your worth. It is evidence about their limitations. Their failure to love you the way you deserve to be loved says nothing true about your value and everything true about their capacity or lack thereof. Stop letting their failure write the definition of your worth. I want to speak to those of you who were betrayed by someone in a position of spiritual authority, a pastor or a leader or a mentor who held your trust at a particularly sacred level and violated it. The wound from that kind of betrayal goes deeper than ordinary relational betrayal because it gets tangled up with your faith itself. It makes you question not just people but me. It makes you associate the pain of what they did with the belief system they represented, and the instinct is to push both away at the same time because separating the person from the faith feels too complicated when you are in the middle of the wound. I need you to hear me clearly on this. What they did was not my instruction. What they did was not my character. What they did was a human being using a position of authority to serve themselves, and it was wrong, and I am angry about it on your behalf. Do not let someone who misrepresented me become your understanding of who I am. I want to speak to those of you who were betrayed publicly, whose wound was witnessed by other people, or whose private pain became public information without your consent. There is a particular humiliation that comes with public betrayal because you cannot even grieve privately. The wound becomes a topic of conversation and speculation, and other people form opinions about your story while you are still in the middle of living it. And that loss of control over your own narrative is its own secondary wound. I see that layer of it too. I know how it felt to have people weigh in on something that not their experience to comment on. I know what it cost you to continue showing up in spaces where the story had already been told without your voice in it. I want to speak to those of you who found out that the betrayal had been going on longer than you initially knew, that what you thought was a single incident was actually a pattern that had been hidden from you for a long time. That revelation has its own specific devastation because it does not just wound the present. It rewrites the past. It makes you look back at a period of time you thought you understood and realize that your understanding of it was built on something false. That is disorienting in a way that is hard to describe to someone who has not experienced it. It makes you question your own perception. It makes you wonder what else you have misread. It makes you distrust your own ability to know what is real. I want to stabilize something in you right now. Your perception is not broken. You were deliberately deceived by someone who worked to manage your perception. That is not the same as you failing to see clearly. It is a very different thing. I know some of you have had to sit across from people who knew what was happening and said nothing. Mutual connections who were aware of the betrayal and protected the person who was doing it rather than warning you. That secondary wound of the bystanders can sometimes be almost as painful as the betrayal itself because it answers a quiet question you had about where people would stand if it came to it, and the answer was not where you hoped they would stand. I know the loneliness of discovering that the community you thought would circle around you in a hard moment chose protection of the person who hurt you over honesty with you. That is a real grief, and it deserves to be named. I want to say something about forgiveness because I know you have heard things about it that may have hurt more than helped. You may have been told you need to forgive as though forgiveness is a light switch you flip once, and then the pain is resolved. And if the pain is not resolved, then you have not truly forgiven. That is not how forgiveness actually works, and I want to offer you a more honest picture of it. Forgiveness is not the absence of pain. Forgiveness is not pretending that what happened was okay. Forgiveness is not reconciliation with the person who hurt you. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is the ongoing decision to release the debt that someone owes you rather than letting the demand for that debt to be paid control your future. It is a process, not a moment, and it often has to be chosen multiple times before it fully takes root. You can be in the process of forgiving someone and still feel the full reality of the wound. Those two things are not contradictory. I also want to say this about reconciliation specifically because they are often confused. Forgiving someone does not require that you return to a close relationship with them. Forgiveness is internal. Reconciliation is mutual, and it requires changed behavior on both sides. You are not required to place yourself back in proximity to someone who has demonstrated that they are not safe simply because you have forgiven them. Forgiveness sets you free. It does not obligate you to give them another opportunity to wound you the same way again. I know some of you are waiting for an apology that may never come. You have rehearsed the conversation in your mind. You have imagined the moment where they finally acknowledge what they did and take genuine responsibility for it, and the acknowledgement gives you something to close the chapter with. That kind of closure is beautiful when it happens, and it is genuinely possible in some situations. But I need to gently tell you that building your healing on the possibility of an apology from someone who has not yet offered one is placing your freedom in their hands. They have already held too much of your story. Do not give them that too. Healing can happen even without the apology you deserve. The closure you are looking for can be found through me, even when it never comes from them. I know the temptation to check on what they are doing now, to follow what is happening in their life from a distance, even though it consistently leaves you feeling worse than before you looked. Part of you is watching to see whether they are suffering consequences for what they did. Part of you is watching to see whether they seem fine while you are still living with the fallout of what they caused. And when they appear to be fine, the anger that you have been working to process comes back fresh, and the injustice of it is almost unbearable. I understand that. And I want to tell you something about the appearance of fine. Appearances are almost never the full picture. What looks like someone thriving without consequences from the outside is rarely the complete story of their interior life. Leave what happens to them in my hands. Justice is not your responsibility to deliver, but it also does not go unaddressed by me. I know some of you have become harder as a result of what happened to you, not in ways that are always visible to others, but in ways that you notice in yourself. You are slower to extend warmth now. You are quicker to read situations with suspicion. You are more likely to withdraw before someone has the chance to reject you. You are less likely to say what you actually feel in relationships because you have learned that vulnerability creates exposure. These changes were protective at first. They made sense in the aftermath of the wound, but now they may be outliving their usefulness and beginning prevent the very connection that you are also quietly longing for. I am not asking you to throw the protection away overnight. I am asking you to begin examining whether it is still serving you or whether it has become a barrier to the healing and connection that is possible for you now. I know some of you are raising children while still processing wounds from your own childhood, trying to give your children what you were not given while still grieving the absence of it in your own story. That particular kind of parenting takes a heroism that rarely gets named. Breaking generational patterns is costly work, and it is mostly invisible work that happens in the daily unremarkable choices of how you respond to your child in moments of stress. You are doing something significant even when it does not feel significant. You are disrupting a pattern that could have continued for another generation, and you are absorbing the cost of that disruption in your own body and your own history. That matters deeply, and I honor you for it. I know some of you have forgiven someone and then found yourself angry again later and assumed that the reappearing anger meant your forgiveness was not real. I want to clarify this. Forgiveness is real even when grief returns. Grief or genuine loss does not have an expiration date. You can be fully committed to not holding a debt against someone and still feel the sadness of what was lost with that relationship. The sadness returning is not evidence that you have not forgiven. It is evidence that what you lost was real and that real losses are missed in ongoing ways. I want to speak to the identity questions that come in the wake of significant betrayal, particularly betrayal in a relationship that was central to your life. When a relationship that was core to your daily existence ends in betrayal, it does not just leave a gap where that person was. It leaves a gap in your understanding of yourself, because so much of how we know ourselves is reflected back through the people closest to us. Who are you now without that relationship as part of your daily reference point? Who are you when the person you built your routines around is no longer there? These are not small questions, and I am not going to pretend they have quick answers, but I want you to know that the identity confusion of this season is not permanent. You are being rebuilt, not returned to who you were before, because that version of you is gone, and that is not entirely a loss. You are being built into someone who is wiser and more discerning and more rooted in a sense of self that does not depend on any one person's presence or opinion of you. I want to speak to those of you who are afraid to tell the full truth of your story because telling it would require you to speak negatively about someone else, and you have been taught that speaking negatively about others is wrong. I want to offer a distinction here. There is a difference between gossip and testimony. Gossip is sharing someone's story for the purpose of entertainment or to damage their reputation or to elevate yourself by lowering them. Testimony is bearing honest witness to your own experience for the purpose of healing or warning others or simply being truthfully known. You are allowed to tell the truth about what happened to you. You are allowed to say this hurt me, and this was wrong, and this is what I lived through. You do not have to protect the reputation of someone who hurt you at the cost of your own healing. I want to speak to those of you who have been told to just get over it by people who were uncomfortable with the duration of your healing or who did not understand the depth of the wound. I want to say directly and clearly that there is no standard timeline for healing from betrayal. The depth of the wound determines the length of the healing, and no one on the outside of your experience can accurately measure either of those things. Give yourself the time you actually need rather than the time other people think you should need. I know some of you are reading this and thinking about multiple betrayals from multiple people over time, a pattern that stretches across different relationships and different seasons of your life. When betrayal is not a single incident, but a recurring theme, it begins to feel like a reflection of something about you rather than something about the people involved. I want to address that painful conclusion directly. Patterns of betrayal in your relationships are more often a reflection of unhealed wounds that were drawing you into unsafe relationships, or of a particular kind of relational pattern you learned early in life than they are a reflection of your unworthiness. It is a pattern that can be understood, and it is a pattern that can change. Not because you start finding perfect people, but because healing changes what you look for and how you read the signals, and when you choose to extend deep trust. I want to say something about the strength it takes to remain a loving person after you have been hurt the way you have been hurt, to not let the wound close your heart entirely. To still choose to show up for people and to still believe in genuine connection even when specific experiences have given you every reason to stop believing. That is not weakness. That is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. To be hurt and to choose to remain open rather than permanently hardened. I see that choice in you, and it is one of the things I honor most about who you are. I want to speak to the grief of who they turned out to be. Not just the grief of losing the relationship, but the specific grief of discovering that the person you loved was not exactly who you believed them to be. The image you held of them has to be updated, and that updating is its own loss separate from the loss of the relationship itself. You are grieving not just a person, but a version of a person that turns out to have been incomplete or partially constructed. That is a particular kind of grief that not everyone names, and I want to name it for you today. Here is what I want you to carry forward from this message. What happened to you was real. The pain from it is valid. The time it is taking to heal is not a sign of weakness. The wounds left by people we trusted are some of the deepest wounds that exist, and they deserve to be treated with the care and seriousness of any deep wound. But I also want you to carry this forward. You are not defined by what was done to you. You are not the sum of someone else's worst moments toward you. The betrayal does not get the final word in your story because I do. And what I am saying over you is that the very depth of your capacity to be hurt is evidence of the depth of your capacity to love. And that capacity to love is not something to be closed down and buried. It is something to be protected and eventually trusted to the right people in the right seasons. The person who hurt you did not have the ability to take your future from you even if it felt that way. They had the ability to wound a season of your past and the early part of your present, but your future is still fully intact and fully mine to write. And I write it with intention and with purpose, and with a full understanding of everything you have walked through and how it has shaped you. You are going to love and be loved again in ways that heal the places that were broken. I am not just saying that to comfort you. I am saying it because I can see what is still ahead of you, and it is not a closed and barren landscape. It is something that the person who hurt you cannot take from you, because they never held it. It belongs to you and to me and to the story that is still being written. Bring me the wound today, not just the surface of it, but the full depth of it. The anger and the grief and the confusion and the identity questions and the fear that it will happen again. Bring me all of it. I can hold every layer of it, and I can begin to work in every layer of it. What was meant to destroy you, I will transform into the very thing that makes you stronger and more compassionate and more equipped to recognize and honor real love when it comes. You are still here. You are still standing, even if it is shaky sometimes. You are still choosing to move forward even when moving forward hurts. That is not nothing. That is everything. And I am with you in every step of it from here. I want to keep speaking because I know there are layers of this wound that we have not fully touched yet, and I do not want to leave any of them unaddressed. I want to speak to the way betrayal changes your relationship with your own memory. After someone you trusted deeply does something that contradicts the person you believed them to be, you go back and look at your shared history through new eyes. You revisit conversations and moments and seasons of closeness, and you try to understand which parts were real and which parts were a performance. You question memories that used to bring you warmth and find they now bring you a complicated mixture of grief and doubt. You wonder if any it was genuine. I want to speak truth into that questioning. Not all of it was false. Real connection can exist alongside serious character flaws in another person. The seasons of genuine closeness were not necessarily manufactured, even if something in them was also hidden. You can grieve the loss of what was real while also naming what was wrong. Both things can be true at the same time without canceling each other out. I want to speak to those of you who were betrayed by someone who then positioned themselves as the victim after the fact. who managed the narrative in a way that turned the story around so that your pain became invisible and their discomfort became the focus, who enlisted others into their version of events before you even understood fully what had happened. The disorientation of watching a story you lived through get rewritten by the very person who caused the wound is one of the most maddening experiences a person can have. It makes you question your own perception. It isolates you from people who heard the other version first. It leaves you in the position of either defending yourself, which makes you look defensive, or staying silent, which makes you seem like you have nothing to say. Neither option feels right, because neither option adequately addresses the injustice of what happened. I see exactly what happened. The rewriting of the narrative does not change what I witnessed. I want to speak to those of you who have never told anyone the full story of what was done to you, who have carried it entirely alone, not because you did not need to speak it, but because there was no space safe enough to speak it in. You have protected people from knowing by absorbing the weight of it yourself. You have smiled through gatherings where the person who hurt you was also present because the alternative was too complicated to navigate. You have answered questions about how you are with versions of fine that were nowhere close to the truth. I want to be the first place where the full story lands if you have not yet found a safe human space for it. Tell me everything. All the parts that still sting. All the parts you are not sure you have even fully processed yet. All the parts you are most ashamed of, even though the shame does not belong to you. I can hold all of it, and I will not use any of it against you. I want to speak to those of you who are in the complicated position of still having to be in contact with the person who hurt you. A co-parent relationship that requires ongoing coordination. A family situation where full separation is not possible. A work environment where you encounter them regularly. The wound does not get to fully heal in the way it might if distance were possible. You are repeatedly exposed to the source of the injury before the injury has closed. That is genuinely hard, and I am not going to minimize it by suggesting it is simply a matter of perspective. Maintaining your emotional stability in ongoing contact with someone who has hurt you requires a level of internal management that is exhausting. Give yourself grace for how much energy that is taking. I want to speak to the children or other innocents who were caught in the middle of a betrayal that was not theirs to carry, who witnessed things or lost things as secondary casualties of what one adult did to another adult. If you are a parent processing a betrayal while also managing the impact on your children, I want to acknowledge the particular weight of that. You are doing your own grief work while also trying to limit damage to the people you love most. That is not a small thing. And the way you handle this season in front of your children is teaching them something significant about how to navigate pain with integrity. Even when it is messy and imperfect, it is teaching them. And they will carry what you are modeling now into the way they face hard things in their own future. I want to speak to those of you who feel guilty for the ways the betrayal affected your other relationships. You may have been less present for people who needed you during the season you were most wounded. You may have leaned too heavily on someone who was not equipped to carry that weight. You may have made decisions in the aftermath of the wound that affected other people in ways you wish they had not. Wounded people do not always make perfect choices. Healing people in progress do not always show up the way they wish they could. Give yourself the same grace you would give a friend who was walking through something this difficult. I want to speak to the anger you sometimes feel at yourself. For not seeing the signs, for giving so much, for trusting so fully, for loving so openly, for choosing that person in the first place. That self-directed anger is one of the most uncomfortable parts of the aftermath because it takes the pain of the wound and turns it inward in a way that adds injury to injury. You are not to blame for being hurt by someone who presented themselves as safe. You are not to blame for loving genuinely. The choice to betray belonged entirely to them. I want to speak to those of you who have questioned your ability to hear my voice as a result of what happened. If you prayed about that relationship and felt peace about it at a time when things were not they appeared to be, you may have concluded that either I was not speaking to you clearly or you were not hearing correctly. I want to speak to that confusion. My peace in a season does not always mean that everything in that season is perfect, or that everyone in your life during that season is trustworthy. My peace sustains you through seasons, including through the parts of seasons that are painful. The presence of my peace was not a guarantee that the relationship was without hidden problems. It was the assurance that you would not be abandoned in whatever that season brought, and you were not abandoned. I was there in every moment of it. I want to speak to those of you who are on the other side of the immediate wound, but still find that certain triggers bring it rushing back. A song that was playing during a significant moment in that relationship, a place you used to go together, a word or phrase they used to say, the specific smell of a season that was tangled up with that time. Triggers are not evidence that you have not healed enough. They are evidence that the neural pathways created by significant emotional experience take time to reroute. They are evidence that the memory lives in your body, not just your mind. Be patient with your triggers. Do not shame yourself for being pulled back into the feeling temporarily. It will become less frequent. The pull will become less strong. It takes longer than you wish it did, but it does move in that direction. I want to speak to those of you who have experienced the specific pain of betrayal from a sibling. The relationship that was supposed to be the longest human relationship of your life, by virtue of shared origin and shared history. When that relationship is broken by betrayal, it carries its own particular grief because it also affects your relationship with your shared history, your childhood, your family gatherings, your mutual memories. The person who shares the longest portion of your life story and yet is no longer safe in the way a sibling is supposed to be safe. I see that specific grief too. I want to speak to those of you who gave years of your life to something that ended in betrayal. Not a short season, but a significant portion of your most vital years. Years you cannot get back. Years that were built around a relationship or a commitment that turned out not to be what it appeared. The grief of lost time is real. The anger of realizing that those years were given to something that was not fully honest with you is valid. And the fear that the loss of those years permanently diminishes what is still available to you is something I want to speak to directly. Time spent in good faith is never wasted in my accounting, even when the thing it was given to turned out to be unworthy of it. What you built in yourself through those years still belongs to you. The character you developed, the lessons you learned, the depth of love you demonstrated. None of that was wasted, and none of it stays behind with the person or situation that did not deserve it. It comes with you into everything that comes next. Here is what I want you to know as we close. I am not asking you to rush your healing. I am not asking you to forgive before you are ready, even though I believe forgiveness is possible and beneficial for your own freedom when you get there. I am not asking you to pretend the wound was smaller than it was. I am not asking you to tell a story of resolution that you have not actually reached yet. What I am asking is that you bring the wound to me in its current state, as raw or as processed as it actually is today. Not the version you think sounds more spiritually mature, the real version. The version that might still have anger in it. The version that might still have confusion in it. The version that might still have questions about whether any of it makes sense. Bring me that version. That is the version I can work with because that is the version that is actually true right now. And I want to tell you what I see when I look at you carrying this wound. I see someone who loved deeply enough to be genuinely hurt. I see someone with a capacity for loyalty and commitment and openness that was used against them, but that still exists and still has enormous potential to create beautiful things in relationships that can actually honor it. I see someone who is still trying to move forward even when moving forward is uncomfortable and unclear. I see someone who has not let the worst thing that was done to them become the whole of who they are. I see someone who is still here. You are still here. After everything that was done to you and everything that was taken from you and everything that was rewritten and minimized and dismissed, you are still here. And that is where I will meet you, right here, in the middle of the still healing, in the middle of the still figuring it out, in the middle of the still moving towards something better, even when you are not entirely sure yet what better looks like. I am for you, not for the people who hurt you, For you, I am not dividing my attention between your perspective and theirs when I look at your situation. I am with you. I am on your side. I am committed to your healing and your future and your freedom from what was done to you, and I will not stop working on your behalf until the full weight of this has been lifted and the full beauty of what is still ahead of you has been revealed. You are loved fiercely by a God who was present for every moment of what you went through, not a distant observer, but a present one. And that same presence that was with you in the worst of it is with you right now and will be with you in everything that comes next. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. And the wound that was meant to be the end of your story is becoming the most significant part of your testimony. Hold on, my child. The best of what I have for you is still ahead.